Hi, and welcome to this edition of the Beacon Hill Report. I'm Jim Marshall of the New Bedford Cable Network, and it's his turn in the hot seat. It's not really a hot seat, but Chris Markey, State Representative from Dartmouth, joining us for this time. Thanks for coming in. Lots going on for you, I know.
Nice to see you, yeah. Keeping busy.
It's been very busy, I know, for you guys. I mean, theoretically, the session ends at the end of June, so a lot of things, I guess, are going through the process right now up on Beacon Hill.
Yeah.
The State House is back open, which is different from the last time you and I talked, which has got to be nice to see from your staff's point, from your point, and just to get things done.
Yes. So the session ends at the end of July, July 31st, and I think the people coming in and now, it's much more relaxing when you're walking around the State House, and it's great to see many more staff members throughout all the offices there. So there seems to be more of a hustle going on there.
Chris Hendricks when he was here last month, said something interesting. He was meeting people he hadn't met, state representatives that he hadn't met personally yet, which I thought was, and I hadn't really thought about that, but yeah.
There's a whole group of freshman class that I've been up several times for the sessions live, but it's tough they've really a tight group, the ones that got elected in 2020, that got sworn in 2021. They're a tight group, and they seem to stick together pretty well, which is great to see. But I don't really know many of them. I've talked to them on the phone on several different issues. And then there's another group from the 18 class that I know probably half of them. So it is a little bit different. Plus, it's kind of like high school, right? You've been there a little bit, you kind of know everybody, and then when you're a freshman, you know everybody, and then when you become a senior, you don't know everybody right off the bat,
right? And
it takes a little bit of time, but it's interesting.
But you, as you have said before, it helps in the process because now you're having that one-on-one conversation with your colleagues, your staffs are having the one-on-one conversations, and things, I don't want to say can be expedited, but they're going faster than what they would be if you're just doing texting or phone or email.
Oh yeah, definitely. And you get a sense of everybody, and the alliances that are there and all that other stuff that happens. You get to see it more. And one of the interesting things my friends and I like to do when we're there is watch who's talking to who. Figure out why is that guy talking to that guy, or why is that woman over there talking to that guy. Those things are always the gathering of intelligence to figure out what's going on and what's to come.
Lots of things happening. I know economic development, especially in the city, has been a big deal. Obviously, we're looking at the golf course, we're looking at the waterfront, lots of things. Wind energy has been a big topic. I know that the House took some steps legislatively to sort of get up to speed with other states. So where are we right now as far as wind energy?
All right, so I think we got to go back a decade, honestly, and I think when we think about what Governor Patrick did in his foresight to see wind energy as a possibility, and President Obama was in there and was talking about renewable energy, and then we have the New Bedford, the Mass Marine Terminal down there in the south end where there's a lot of activity. My office overlooks that, and I can see lots of boats coming in and out, big boats that are working on the real significant things. So you look at that initial foresight and you say, wow, that was great. And a lot of people question should we spend that kind of money on a new marine terminal in New Bedford? But you have to look at what New Bedford is. It's one of the 5 deep water ports in the Commonwealth that needs to be taken care of. And I think Governor Patrick did that. And then we have Governor Baker, who took over and I think just soared with it and saw the possibilities. I mean, think about it. We could be the energy source of really the East Coast, and even further in, probably all the way to Chicago, much like the Gulf Coast is with fossil fuels.
Yeah.
So I think that when you look at it, it was a great investment way back when. And now, as we progress, much like we did with healthcare, right? We gave universal healthcare, and we fine-tune it throughout the next decade or two, and we're still doing that because we're seeing how we can improve. The same for offshore wind. Offshore wind we're finding little nooks and crannies that need to be fixed to make sure it happens. First, President Trump was not supportive of it. Biden came in and has been, again, another soaring on the idea of it, has provided many opportunities for people in Massachusetts to be able to succeed in it. And now we have all these companies starting to lease the water to be able to develop it. So if we look along the South Coast and we see the development that's occurred, private development at Brayton Point with a manufacturing company that's going to bring the cables in from the offshore turbines in through Brayton Point. That's huge. That they're already a Massachusetts company. They are going to be creating hundreds of jobs for that location, which is consistent with what that piece of land was used for before as a power plant. Then we start to come east, and we look at what's happened in New Bedford. We have the marine terminal that was funded by the state. We have another group led by Andrew Saunders, a New Bedford native, getting the Cannon Street Eversource project, and that's going to be created as a place where companies can come in and do their maintenance of the turbines and have that as their base. And then we look at the dredging that's occurred over the last 7 years with the Baker administration spending a lot of money and a lot of time making sure that New Bedford, the harbor, is properly prepared for offshore wind. So when you take all of that private industry and then you look and you even go further down to the Cape where I believe it was in Osterville or Hyannis where that's where some of the cables are actually going to come in right at a beach there, and I think Vineyard Wind has that, and they had a big opening for that. So that's kind of all an interesting possibility, and I just think there's thousands of jobs that can be created from the offshore wind industry throughout the South Coast, and it's going to bring people again to the South Coast to work and good paying jobs.
And it's interesting too because you've got the education tie-in with UMass Dartmouth, BCC. Educationally, you're getting advancements as well, and again, that's a state initiative.
Yeah. So if we look at what's going on in our education system,
Mass Maritime, I should say too.
So yes. So you got Mass Maritime with their engineering and all their marine engineering. Vocational schools are getting into it. BCC is hugely investing in this. They see it as an opportunity for a lot of people with an associate's degree to be able to do this. And they're also going to give certificates and technical support to a lot of things in their NAWI, which they call for Offshore Wind Institute. That's going to be down in New Bedford. And then there's UMass that has been with SMass right around the corner here. And it is just that combination. It couldn't be more attractive to the private industry to have that core of potential employees working for them.
When you see those, and it's interesting too, you've got those three schools really close together that have their own niche in a sense, but the combination of all three really covers a lot of the know-how that you need to, in a sense, get a job, to work in this industry.
Yeah, I mean, and again, the flexibility of that for BCC to be able to do that is huge. I mean, they've really turned the way in which they're educating people, adult educators, immediately. I mean, in the last 4 years, their curriculum has changed just to suit the needs of this industry. So it's pretty impressive.
Talk about a second about education, because you were talking about the change, and I was reading an article and talking about education in general, and that the state's investment in education is lower, and you've talked about this before, is lower than it was 10, 15 years ago, and that the cost of education is going up. I mean, the tuition is not cheap, as you know.
No, it's not. And this is one of the things that I've been trying to do up at the State House for really since I've been up there is I think that we have scholarship money from the state that goes to students from Massachusetts. Whether they go to school in Massachusetts or they go to school in another state, financially, if they fit into this category, we can guarantee up to, I think it's $2,700 or something around that amount. So it's not a huge amount of money, but it's something that can help. My feeling on it is that, and I've tried to file an amendment, and I'll file it again this year in the budget, is to try to get schools that have an endowment of over $1 billion. And I believe there's 9 in Massachusetts.
Really?
Smith, BU, Harvard, MIT, Boston College, Wellesley, some other schools. But they shouldn't be entitled to that. In my mind, we need to have them dig into their huge endowments. I think Harvard probably is over $40 billion now. I would venture to, this is numbers from 4 or 5 years ago, they were at 30 something. And the way the market's going now, I'm sure it's immensely larger. And the same thing with MIT. I think those numbers are huge. I feel that those schools should free up some of the other money, we could increase that amount, particularly for state schools. I think it would be a great thing for it to apply to state schools.
But it's interesting that it looks as though and again, I think I read this in the Commonwealth magazine, that there's not a lot of kids going to school. They feel as though they can't afford it right now, which is, I guess, kind of frustrating when you really think about it.
Yeah, well, I think one thing is we're coming off of a pandemic where it was very difficult, and I think when you're making a big decision like that, there are some people who look at it and say, well, why don't I take 2 years and then I'll come back and I'll do that. And I totally agree with that. I think there was so much uncertainty, it might not be worth the investment at the time. I think people will eventually start coming back about it. And what you're seeing now in the higher ed world is I think the state universities are doing much better. UMass, I think UMass Dartmouth particularly has a great chancellor now who's fantastic energy. He's at all the sporting events. It's like a rebirth of UMass Dartmouth there. And I think the students really appreciate that. And I think that whole environment is different than it was 2 years ago. And I see that Chancellor Fuller is doing a great job bringing that in. And their numbers will start going up. The law school, their numbers are going up when almost every law school is going down.
Right.
That law school is the hidden gem of higher ed in southeastern Massachusetts. I went there when it was Southern New England School of Law, and I teach there. So the quality of the students from when I was there, getting me in there and getting me through law school, and then now teaching there and seeing the kids, the students who are there, tremendous improvement. And I think it's just going to keep going up. And they're investing in the social justice ideas that we all want from our lawyers. So it's really appreciative to have that.
And I remember as a kid growing up, I mean, for so many people, the option of going to UMass Dartmouth was really their, in a sense, only option financially and what have you. And they were, in many cases, and you've heard this 1,000 times, was the first generation of the family that was going to school. And I would argue that when you look across the state, UMass Dartmouth, BCC are so important to the region in so many ways, not just educationally, versus any other part of the state.
So the concept of higher ed has changed too. You see schools like Southern New Hampshire University, which is almost all online. They have accommodations for that. UMass is investing in that and doing that as well, so that there's a lot of people who have gotten to 2 or 3 years, haven't finished their last year and a half for a variety of reasons. Those opportunities are there at UMass Dartmouth now, and they're really marketing it towards that and getting that. The other thing is some exposure to bring local people there. One of the things that I've been pushing for at UMass is to get hockey rinks there. I had conversations probably 7 or 8 years ago. I talked about the importance of it. My daughter went to Merrimack. They had 2 rinks there. And I got to see from that experience that every time I went in there, there's families coming in with students or with kids playing hockey all weekend long, and they have games there. And why do I say that? Okay, well, it's hockey kids. Okay, it's a small group. It's getting them on campus, 1, and getting them to see a campus. 2, it's a revenue source for the school. It's another alternative for them to create and keep the tuitions as low as possible.
Yeah, because you do public skating.
So and then you
like
got tournaments, and you got teams renting it out. So those alternatives, I think the dean sees as that as an important part of the whole academic experience for kids, and it also gives some students jobs while on campus. So it's all good.
Do you see the cost of tuition in general when you look at the university or the state college system staying the same, or is it going to continue to creep up? Or, I mean, because I know the talk is the legislature needs, or the governor needs, there needs to be more money. Yeah. But how do you do that?
Well, I think it's a balance, right? One is trying creative ways of creating revenue, and at the same time lowering expenses, right? Lowering expenses and creating revenues is online teaching. It accommodates people. We saw over the last 2 years how we can all work online is essentially, and you can educate online. So the technology is there, the revenue stream could be there in a wider range at a cheaper cost, and the expenses are much less. You're not buying for the infrastructure, and we right now need huge improvements to the physical facility of UMass. It was all built in basically in like 3 years, and so everything breaks within the 3 years. So we're working on that and getting funding for that as well, and really working with the administration to get that done.
I was on the campus not that long ago, and I was impressed. I really hadn't been in the campus. I've been around the campus, but I hadn't been in the campus. And when you look at UMass Dartmouth, it's really grown leaps and bounds.
Well, you look at the first...
Just physically.
But again, that's another example of it. The former Chancellor Johnson had a vision to create a dormitory inside the circle.
Correct.
Right? And
Yep.
they created this beautiful building that's there. And again, that was a public-private partnership. Again, reducing the costs and allowing for more students to be there and a better experience, which will bring in more students and will increase the revenue without increasing the costs. So those are the things that I think a good creative chancellor will do. I'm not going to tell him what to do. I'm going to listen to him. I'm going to advise him and say, oh, these are good ideas, these are things. But once he comes to a decision, I'm going to advocate for it if we think it's going to be in the best interest of our community. The other thing about, it's still the #1 school for local kids in their first generation. There's not many kids who are not being accepted into UMass Dartmouth locally. What we do need to do is get kids from kind of the Sudburys, the Concords, the Lexingtons, and out-of-state tuition and out-of-country tuitions. Because once we create those tuitions and they bring them in, they're paying full tuition. We're trying to keep our tuitions down locally. So the concept of bringing in these students from other more affluent towns and countries is only going to help us keep a stability of the tuitions.
Is it hard when you're looking at that? Because, obviously there's UMass Amherst, UMass Lowell, UMass Boston. There's different campuses, and is it a balancing act? Are you guys, as the delegation, and it's obviously a bigger delegation when you're talking UMass Dartmouth, but you guys just pounding the door trying to make sure that, in a sense, you get your fair share for this campus?
Yeah, I think that carries on from, Senator Rodericks, who was a graduate of UMass, Senator Montigny, who was a graduate of UMass. I went to what I consider to be UMass Law School. I believe Tony had gone there, Cabral, that we all have, I'm sure Chris Hendricks has a ton of friends who went there. I'm not sure if he went there for undergrad. Great guy. Like that, we all have a commitment to it. And I think there's certain things we all have a commitment to. I think South Coast Hospitals, I think UMass, Dartmouth, I think BCC, almost anything that they really want to do, we're all behind and pushing for.
We are talking with State Representative Chris Markey on this edition of the Beacon Hill Report. I want to get to, because we were talking about off camera, a bill that you had advocated for and got going with the school collaboratives and regarding healthcare. Why don't you tell us about that?
So school collaboratives are school districts that get together and organize to help with special needs students or people who are having a tough time academically and in that respect. So what happens is there's kind of the wraparound services that are required from nursing all the way through. So if
and they're required, if I'm not mistaken, aren't they? In a sense, some mandated in some cases.
Yeah. So essentially, what happens is so someone is a nurse at a public school system, they can't work for the collaborative on the weekends or part time or over the summer, because the rules didn't allow that. The ethics rules didn't allow it. It was brought to my attention from a neighbor, again, talking to them and doing my little, and they brought it to my attention. We talked about it. We thought about solutions. At the time, I was the chairman of ethics. It worked out well. We filed it 4 years ago, and then it just passed this year with the help of Senator Montigny as well. But
it's crazy. 4 years you did that, and it takes 4 years to.
Yeah,
it just shows the process, how the process works.
Yeah, and it's a common sense solution to a problem that shouldn't exist. The continuity of care, all of that is really important for an individual's growth. So, what the collaborative was doing, again, we know from the hospitals that nursing and all of these social servicing, they were in decline before the pandemic. Now during the pandemic it was even worse. So now they can have a continuity of care. So the same nurse who's caring for Johnny Smith can care for Johnny Smith or the therapist can care for Johnny Smith over the summer and paid by the collaborative, as well as getting paid by the Acushnet school system or by the Freetown school system. So it made sense. I'm glad we got it done.
Yeah, it's interesting that took so long. I'm curious because I saw in the paper, in having to do with obviously your other job, being a lawyer, but with Walpole closing the jail as part of judicial reform. It's interesting when you see that it just struck me as that was something, really, because that's always been around, the jail up there.
Well, it's old.
Yeah, and that's part of the problem is
Yeah.
the upkeep of it is unbelievable. But but the population's down too in there. I'm just curious with your take because you've been on Judiciary Committee, but you are a lawyer as well.
Yep.
It struck me.
So this is my take on it. Is I was on probably 4 or 5 different special commissions on criminal justice since I've been up there.
Yeah.
There was always something going on, whether it's juvenile, and we did the reform, and I was chairman or acting chair of Judiciary at the time, reform of the juvenile sentencing of first-degree murder, and the big judicial reform, criminal justice reform we did probably in 2017. I was on the commission, and what I would say is that we don't have mass incarceration in Massachusetts. And I was a prosecutor, and I'm a defense attorney.
You've been on both sides,
so
exactly.
I get it, but there is not mass amounts of people, unlike other states where it is a huge problem. Mm-hmm. What we do have is mass probation. And that's a huge problem in Massachusetts because our probation services cannot keep up with the number of people who are on probation. And one of the lines I have is, there's people in jail who should be on the street, and there's people on probation who should be in jail.
Yeah.
Because there are people in jail who need better services. And I also think that parole plays a huge role in it. We have people who are both on parole and on probation at the same time. That makes no sense at all.
I was going to say, how does that work?
So my feeling on it is again, I can get into the weeds about it and talk about probation is really set for people from 18 to 25. Okay. That's where you can change lives. You can change. I mean, probably earlier, but the idea of the younger individuals are the ones. Probation, in the eyes of the law, is a rehabilitative sentence. Parole is bringing someone back into society after being incarcerated. Right. So the way to resolve it is, and again, going into the weeds is a little bit, is having a gap between the high end and the low end of a state prison sentence of 25%. So you get a 3 to 4 instead of a 4 to 4 in a day. And the reason for that is you're going to be guaranteed to get out on parole. And there's some supervision. And if there's some supervision, parole is the ones who are trained to do that. Probation's not trained to do that as much as parole is. So it makes sense to try to do something like that. There is huge numbers down in our state prison system. It's a good thing. I think one of the reasons why is we're creating more opportunities for rehabilitative centers, and also realizing how much many of the crimes that are committed are the result of some type of drug addiction. And we have done, I think, collectively, Governor Baker, the legislature, have done. There's a woman from Jamaica Plain, Liz Malia, who I think is one of the nicest people. She's not running again. Does a tremendous job of working towards better job on substance abuse. And I think that's one of the reasons why there's such a reduction, is there's an appreciation for it within the criminal justice system, both on the prosecutorial level and the judicial level. So I think the last decade has really influenced that.
Got a couple minutes left here, and I just want to touch base because you mentioned farming earlier, and obviously a lot of your district is farmland. And some people might say, well, it's not the city, but I mean, it does impact the city and the like. Farmers are facing obviously differences now with the pandemic sort of ending. What is sort of things are you looking at right now to help them sort of get back up to speed where they were pre-pandemic?
Well, I think if you were to look at how we've done from 2010 through 2020 as far as farming. There's a lot more local farming going on in southeastern
There's
Massachusetts.
been a push, absolutely, yeah.
And it really was increasing. There's pop-up little places that you don't need. Oh, geez, I didn't know that was there.
New Bedford's had a lot of farmers markets.
Yeah, they have, and they focused on that because we've invested in that. And one of the things I did was buy local amendment, and we got a lot of technical assistance and money for that. But those things exposes people who are in the city to the kind of the beauty of having eating food right from the neighboring town. So that's one thing. But then so the farmers markets are improving, expanding them to allow them to sell wine was a huge thing, in beer. So that's a great thing that allows local. We got Buzzards Bay Brew in Westport Winery. We got another winery in Red Brook in Dartmouth, and those things are really important. But the real thing for farmers is land. Right,
Yep.
We need to keep the land and maintain the land and have an appropriate growth, and that's where New Dartmouth is. New Bedford, we're taking over a golf course to build an industrial park. Dartmouth has farmland that's being sold off for purposes of building houses. So we need to make sure that we try to protect those lands as much as possible.
Is Dartmouth, when you look at the land, farmers or whatever, Dartmouth has lost farmers, or farms, I should say. But does Dartmouth still have a good amount compared to other communities that are farming land?
Yeah, definitely. There's landowners who are leasing out land to farmers, so it's good. We're in a good spot. We could be better, but as far as how Dartmouth is perceived in the farming world, people are impressed with the way in which the town operates and incentivizes it, and also how the state has helped places like Dartmouth grow.
And it's interesting because I know when Chris Hendricks was in, Paul Schmidt was in, they have their little push for farmland, but because it's so important, and they were, and they've both said with the pandemic sort of changed, like everything else, it changed the game a little bit for farmers as well, and it's another thing you have to keep up with.
Well, one of the things is housing, right? That's one of the issues that we discuss all the time, and I believe. There's a big push for rent control, which I don't think is necessarily the answer for everything. I think home ownership is the answer. I'm hoping that we spend more money on assisting people getting down payments for homes so that they can create wealth. I have 4 kids. I have 3 college tuitions currently. I'm paying for that because of the wealth in my home. I don't have stocks. I don't have bonds. I don't have all these other things. But I have my savings account is essentially my home. So you borrow against that, and that's what allows people to create wealth, to be able to do that.
Yeah.
And just raising the minimum wage is great, but it doesn't create wealth. We need to get people to buy a home, assist them in buying a home, forgive whatever money we can give for a down payment if they hold the home for 10 years or so. And if they don't, we get it back, and we can continue to have a trust like that. And I was hoping we could convince people that the ARPA money would be best used for that in creating wealth, which creates a middle class.
Lots to talk about. Thanks for coming in today.
Yeah, my pleasure.
We'll see you in a couple months for sure.
Yep.
That's going to do it for this edition of the Beacon Hill Report. I'm Jim Marshall of the New Bedford Cable Network. Thanks for watching, and we'll talk to you again soon.